Over the last 6 years of working with over 600 clients in my practice, 99.9% of the clients I've worked with have a sodium deficiency when they start working with me. Sodium deficiency can be linked to bloating, constipation, dizziness, fatigue, nighttime urination, low blood pressure, and actually high blood pressure. And for many of my clients, none of these symptoms improve until they address their sodium problem. So, given this issue, why aren't more people talking about sodium deficiency? In today's episode, I'm diving into the fallacies and myths around sodium and how quote unquote bad it is for you. And I'm replacing it with exactly what you need to do to determine if you have a sodium deficiency, and if so, what to do about it. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormones, skin, sleep, and brain concerns. Literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. All right, guys, I do not know why it has taken me so long to do a salt episode. I talk about salt all the time in my practice. I talk about it with a lab that I do with almost every single client, which I'm going to talk about today, which shows if you have a sodium deficiency. I talk about all the ways that we don't want to be taking in salt, all the salts that are actually making us more sodium deficient. I talk about everything I cover in today's podcast, and I've just never thought of putting it as a podcast episode strong enough that I actually got around to doing it. So this is finally the episode of episodes. It's going to connect with lots of things I've talked about before, especially if you're here for bloating and constipation, which is what I started off focusing on in my practice. But honestly, if you're here and you just have a load of mystery symptoms, if you know you have low blood pressure, POTS disease, it's not a disease, but POTS, which is a syndrome, if you have high blood pressure, if you're on medication for high blood pressure, this episode is related and relevant to you. Also, if you're here and you saw that nighttime urination thing, that's a thing too. So today I'm going to go over 4 different sections of information. Number 1 is going to be signs and symptoms of sodium deficiency. Number 2, why we're all so sodium deficient. I've got 5 reasons there. What to do for testing for sodium deficiency, and then how to actually replenish your sodium. How many milligrams of salt is actually therapeutic. There's some things you need to avoid if you actually want to be successful in giving yourself sodium. So there's a lot of odd and interesting details. It's not as straightforward as you think it is, which I think is part of why so many of us are becoming sodium deficient. But by the end of today's episode, you're going to know all these things, and you're going to be that much closer to understanding how to put together a map of what to do to heal yourself. All right, so signs and symptoms of sodium deficiency. I actually started this section out by saying I'm actually really curious what Google would say. And by Google, I mean the top biggest hospitals that are getting all the hits of healthcare related questions. So the actual number 1 website that came up is just interesting. That's the first thing that Google pulled up was the National Kidney Association, which makes sense because our kidneys control salt in the body. And that's actually, we're going to bring that up later. That is important. The National Kidney Association talks about primarily, it's called hyponatremia, which is actually low sodium in the blood. And this initially and immediately, when I'm doing research and just being curious, like, if I didn't know about as much about sodium deficiency as I do, but I thought maybe I had it, what would show up if I Googled it? And immediately this catches my eye as a health practitioner because low sodium in the blood, while it totally will cause symptoms and it's not great, the thing that's actually causing the majority of symptoms for my clients and the symptoms that I'm really concerned about is what we call cellular deficiency of sodium. And we're going to get into that on why that's important and what's involved in cellular deficiency. But it's the main reason that sodium deficiency is so common in so many people, because most people's blood levels of sodium is in the normal range. I very rarely get a client who, for standard lab ranges, their sodium is low, right? That is usually just absurdly low. So the things that they list, I now know they're going to be talking on a medical level of people who are extremely sodium deficient. And it was like either the second or the third result on Google was from Mayo Clinic, who they typically are showing up on my like top 5 results when I do any medical research. Mayo Clinic specifically said that older adults are mainly at risk to this low sodium in the blood, hyponatremia, due to taking medications that can cause poor absorption or retention of salt. And that is a second red flag of medical system is not talking about the type of sodium deficiency that is affecting a huge chunk of the population. And that also means that the research we have around it is also only geared towards what I would call extreme sodium deficiency, things that these older adult populations are getting where the blood levels of sodium are significantly low, not functional lab range low, which I do actually see a lot, but standard lab range. And if you want to know more about standard versus functional lab ranges, I am going to put a link in the show notes to a podcast episode where I break that down and why that's important and what do you need to know about that. However, that's some of what I found. They did list some symptoms of that when I read through this, just like conventional medicine. I thought, a bunch of these symptoms are going to be what you're going to get with cellular and low blood levels of sodium, even on a mild level. So headaches, which sometimes we think, oh, you need to drink more water. Actually, you might need more sodium to actually absorb and retain that water. Muscle weakness, spasms, twitching, and cramps, which a lot of times we're giving magnesium for, but I'm going to talk about this. Sodium and also potassium are going to be important for that. Low blood pressure. A lot of people know that if you have chronic low blood pressure, a lot of times I will have clients say, my doctor recommended me to eat more salt. It's probably the only time I hear doctors say you should take more salt is if your blood pressure is just really consistently super low. Dizziness when standing up, low energy and fatigue, loss of appetite. I think that's more in extreme cases, which again, that's not going to be what we typically see. Although one thing I'm about to talk about is that low sodium can cause low stomach acid, because sodium is one of the things you need to create stomach acid, and low stomach acid can create a reduction in appetite. But pretty much every other symptom that they mentioned is for this like very extreme low sodium in the blood, what I would call like more medical opposed to more functional. So that's what conventional medicine had to say. This is what my observations have been, as well as some just scientific truths. So based on science, we know that sodium influences peristalsis. So peristalsis is the natural movement of the gut that helps move food from one place to another, and from like the stomach to the small intestine, large intestine. So if you have low sodium, it affects muscles, right? It's a electrolyte like magnesium, like potassium. Calcium's also an electrolyte. And you need electrolytes for your muscles to be able to fire, to contract and relax, and then contract again and relax again. And if you don't have enough of your electrolytes, your muscles will typically get stuck in one of those where they're weak and they can't contract, or they're cramping and they can't relax, which that's when people say, oh, I'm getting muscle cramps at nights, I'm getting Charlie horses, I'm going to take magnesium. Well, you actually also might need sodium and potassium, or you might mainly need sodium, potassium, and not magnesium at all. And that just isn't talked about. And I'm going to talk about my theories on why that is. But oddly enough, your gut that is creating that peristalsis, the movement of food, it's made up of muscle. It's made up of smooth muscle. So it's different than our skeletal muscle. And it basically, it's like muscle cramping, but for the gut. Yeah, and that's going to cause bloating. That's going to cause slow transition of food so that you get that feeling of indigestion or feeling of overly full after eating a small amount of food. And then, of course, it's going to impact constipation. This is a huge, huge, huge thing. And one of the reasons and one of the things I see is consistently missing when people are going to health practitioners to try and fix their constipation. No one's talking about salt. So if you have constipation, especially listening to this, if you have bloating, you need to listen to this. This is for you. Another thing that sodium influences is cell membrane permeability. And you want to care about this because cell membrane permeability means it's your doors to your cells. And your cells will not function well, and or they will just straight up die if they don't get the nutrients they need. Think glucose, think amino acids, protein, the basis of all proteins. And then they also need to get the toxins out, the just general metabolic waste that a cell creates. And this isn't even excessive amount of toxins, which cells will also get exposed to. So we need salt to have a healthy cell membrane permeability where good things can get in and bad things can get out. Stomach acid levels. And actually, just a moment, if you're like, how do I know if my cell membrane permeability is off? Some of the biggest symptoms are going to be fatigue. That's the big one. It's going to be this fatigue. Doesn't matter how much you sleep. And often the fatigue might get worse after you eat a meal. It's because you cannot integrate and actually absorb into your cells the nutrients that you're getting exposed to. So the cells are in ketosis potentially. Even if you're eating carbs, they might be in ketosis. You can have fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies like vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin E, because you need to be able to get these fat-soluble vitamins into your cells, which sodium, potassium have a big role in. The next thing is going to be stomach acid levels. We need sodium to create stomach acid. I've talked a lot about how zinc is something we need for stomach acid, and I find that zinc is the bigger culprit in causing low stomach acid levels, but low sodium, you also need sodium for stomach acid. So that can cause a lot of indigestion and potentially even acid reflux. If you want to know more about what I've shared on acid reflux and zinc levels and basically stomach acid in general, I've linked a couple episodes in our show notes for you to go and listen to. And the last thing is blood pressure and heart rate. So we know scientifically that sodium impacts blood pressure and heart rate. Too little sodium is going to cause low blood pressure. But here's the interesting thing. The wrong kinds of sodium, or basically too little sodium, can also cause high blood pressure. And we're going to talk into how is that? How can it cause both low and high blood pressure? Just you wait. It's very interesting. And sodium also influences heart rate. So after doing testing on hundreds of adults, I start off this episode saying I've worked with over 600 adults with chronic health issues of varying kinds, autoimmune conditions, hormone issues, fatigue, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, skin issues, acne, eczema, psoriasis. I'm not going to list them all. There's so many. It's the entire body, headaches and migraines and eye pain and so many different symptoms, right? These are the symptoms that I see go away the fastest that clients have never been able to get rid of prior to working with me when we address sodium, along with everything else you need to do to get sodium in a good level in the body. So nighttime urination goes away, low blood pressure normalizes, they don't get lightheaded when they stand. I've had clients reduce their medication for high blood pressure or completely get off of it. They have fatigue that massively improves, abdominal bloating, constipation, general indigestion, and acid reflux all also improve. I will make a huge disclaimer. Number one, on blood pressure medication, this is not medical advice. I'm just sharing what's possible. So don't just go start high dosing sodium after listening to this episode. You want to have the correct steps, particularly when you have high blood pressure. One of the problems that you can be having, that at least I see my clients have, is they have a high amount of other toxins like heavy metals and a high amount of other pathogens present. And that will actually activate your adrenal glands, and your adrenal glands control your aldosterone hormone, which controls sodium and potassium in the blood. So you want to make sure the adrenal gland's not freaking out. And I'm not talking about meditating more. I'm talking about getting rid of hidden pathogens that doctors won't be able to find. It's sad. It's just the summary. Their testing cannot show. They either won't test for the pathogens that are there because you don't have the acute signs for it. They don't recognize the chronic signs, meaning acute means short-term, very severe, intense. Chronic means long-term, lower grade. They just don't recognize those. Or the testing they do is not as sensitive. And there's a variety of reasons why. Some of it's honestly just to save money. Some of it is the way that that testing has been impacted by research. But the point is that they will miss pathogens that then when I test for in our program, the Better Belly Blueprint, you actually find the pathogen. If you don't deal with those and you just start high dosing sodium, like what I'm about to describe at the end of this episode, then especially with high blood pressure, things will get worse instead of better. But when you do things in the right order, very safely, very controlled environment, not haphazard, then I see clients safely get off of or reducing their blood pressure medication when there's high blood pressure. The other thing, kind of linked to that, which is a big disclaimer, is I am not suggesting that all you need to do is increase your sodium. It is the wrong conclusion to listen to this episode or any episode that talks about one topic on this podcast. I have some episodes that talk about, like the 4 steps to do this. That's usually going to be a complete, here's everything you need to do. And if you want to know what that is, I actually have a training. If you go to betterbellytherapies.com/training, I actually take you through the entire process A to Z of what you need to do to heal so you don't miss any steps or do any steps in the wrong order, no matter what your symptoms are. If you simply want to feel better, you've been trying to work on your health, the diet has not been working, supplementation has not been working, you've been spending lots of money and time and effort, you're tired of how hard you have to work in your health, and you just don't feel your best, right? You can feel better, or you downright feel horrible every day for whether it's horrible in your gut, horrible in your skin, horrible in your weight, horrible, whatever it is going on, autoimmune conditions. This process has worked with all of them. So just go to betterbellytherapies.com/training if you want to see the special system that I've created that can take you through this process safely and get you results in 3 to 6 months. But that's my disclaimer is even though I'm going to talk about the amazing and the very big importance of salt and the importance of not ignoring sodium deficiency, I'm not saying this is like a magic pill and all your problems will go away if you just take more salt. That is unfortunately oversimplifying things. All right, moving on from that disclaimer. And I only say that because I really hate the current culture we have around health and healing, that it's like a pill for an ill. You need to do one thing and then everything will be fixed. And that mindset can make us very discouraged when we do that one thing and it doesn't work. So I would feel really bad if I accidentally was proliferating that in this podcast because of not sharing that disclaimer. So that is my disclaimer. It's not to make you feel that you have to do my program, but it is to say there is a solution that will take you through every step you need to do in an orderly fashion that's very fast and doesn't require you to be on lifelong extreme diet restrictions and supplements the rest of your life, right? Because if you are doing that right now, then you haven't truly fixed everything. If you need to constantly take supplements to even sort of feel okay, or you're on a really extreme food restriction diet, whether that's like low FODMAP is a common one. Things like that, it's a big sign that something else is going on that you aren't seeing or addressing, and more diet changes aren't enough. All right, I'm going to end that little spiel. Moving on. Why are we all so sodium deficient, y'all? All right, number 1 is going to be bad research. So there was some research that was done 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s on food and its impact on our health. And some of the research is like cholesterol came up with that. So research was like cholesterol is what causes heart disease. That's not what causes heart disease. It's cholesterol. It's the foods that they were testing that also had high levels of everything. It's like fast food, right? So they were testing it on things like French fries and fast food and not homemade food, just not having a balanced diet. They weren't keeping other variables in mind, like were these people eating vegetables? Were they eating calorically inside of how many calories they actually needed per day, right? Were they moving? Were they exercising? All they decided is that cholesterol was definitely the thing that was correlating with these people's issues. So salt kind of got thrown into that era of bad research. And I honestly don't, some people literally specialize in talking about that. It's not my favorite because the only point is what do we actually do to fix it? But basically, salt got this bad rep, that it causes high blood pressure when you have high amounts of it. And I'm going to talk about why that's sort of true for salt, but it's also actually not true at the baseline. All right. But this resulted in lower salt intake as a society. So we got really into like low sodium canned foods. So low sodium black beans, low sodium tomato sauce. And I still actually buy those brands, and I'm going to tell you why, but then I add in salt, and I'm also going to tell you why. And it has to do with point number 2. So we're all sodium deficient because of, one, bad research that caused, as a society, us to decrease salt intake without understanding that, number 2, there's good salt and there's bad salt. And bad salt is what I like to call chemical salt, but you know it as table salt. Woohoo! Table salt is man-made salt. It's taking sodium and chloride and putting it together inside of a lab and making salt. And that is what salt is. Like if you go and mine salt, like Himalayan pink salt or even sea salt, it's sodium and chloride. The problem, and this is very interesting, I did a bunch of research on this. I've been teaching this for a while to my clients, but not with the research. And I thought, I'm just going to go and see what I can find. Because I do know that if the research, what I teach, it was what everyone thought. The research would be in the top 5 of Google, but it's not, right? You have to use a lot more extra words to get really specific and find somebody saying something that's true, because this is crazy. So the problem between man-made salt, aka table salt, and mined salt has to do something with ions. And I'm not talking about ionization. This made it really hard to research because if you know anything about chemistry, which I almost don't want to get into it because maybe you don't, but chemistry, you can have it has to do with the amount of electrons in a mineral or guys, this is a little bit deeper than where I wanted to go, but like sodium on its own has positive ionization and chloride has a negative ionization. And that's actually why they attract each other. They kind of complete each other and then you get salt. However, ions has to do with a charge that we get. And it was interesting when I was doing the research, I found multiple articles that said we know that there are negative and positive ions like in the air, and it can affect minerals, it can affect water, things like that. But we don't even fully know how and why they impact the human body the way they do. And it was a little difficult to research in terms of there's lots of studies that show, like, I'm actually curious. Have you guys ever heard? Let me actually, before I tell you, ask you if you've heard of this research. Have you ever had the experience that when you go to the ocean, like you're standing on the beach, I don't care if it's hot, it doesn't have to be sunny. You're like listening to the waves, you're just on the beach, you feel calmer, right? You feel happier, you feel more peaceful. Or maybe it's not an ocean, maybe it's a forest. Like when you go on a hike in a forest, or if you live close to kind of a densely wooded area, when you go into that wooded area, you feel better. Or you feel better when you are by a waterfall. Maybe you're traveling in Hawaii, or you go and see the waterfalls that are between the US and Canada, right? It's actually noted that people feel better in these situations. And we know it's because of something called negative ions that are impacting your cells. Now, there's different people who will describe why this is. Some people say that humans are more designed to be in we're more positively charged ion-wise because of all the metabolic processes going on in us. So the negative ions help balance us out. But then there's a lot of research that basically, especially when you're looking at medical bodies of research, they say we don't actually fully know why. We just know it's documented very, very well that basically negative ions help depression. I couldn't find this article, but I remember reading it maybe 10 years ago, maybe more. I think it was when I was in college, which would be more than 10 years, that they basically took a bunch of people who had clinical depression and put them in a forest. I don't know what it might have been like once a day or something for like 2 weeks. And then they had a control group where this group didn't go into a forest. And I think that they did like group therapy. I don't know if they might have let him even be on pharmaceuticals. I don't remember the role of pharmaceuticals in this study, but basically the group that just went into the forest, like they didn't have to talk. I think they just like were like, go sit, stand, walk, whatever you want to do. You have to just be in the forest for a certain amount of time. The group that was spent time in the forest had lower ratings of depression after the study, at the end of the study, than the control group that did more like normal controls of depression. And I mean, it's just crazy, right? And when I read that, I thought, I get that. Like, I do feel better when I spend time in nature. How many of us say that? I just feel better when I spend time in nature. We all want to go to the beach or the forest or the mountains or go see waterfalls. And it's not just you. It's not just the sound is soothing, though I think people have talked about sound of waves as soothing. It's literally your cells. So I'm just going to include 3 articles I found that I thought was interesting. And the other thing that got mentioned, which is actually also fairly contentious, is the idea of Himalayan sea salt having this, and more so the Himalayan sea salt lamps that they do create some negative ions. It's not very much. But then that's why people will put negative Himalayan sea salt lamps in their rooms, is because it's like this kind of thing we've just adopted of, okay, it's kind of supposed to be healthy for us. But here's the thing. When you make salt, it has a positive ion on it, right? Or I don't want to say ionization because I don't want to get that confused with the fact that sodium has positive ionization and chloride has negative. It's the actual sodium chloride like component that is positive. And then when it's man-made, when it comes from nature, it's negative. So how does this become important? Well, we rely a ton on table salt. Table salt is so much cheaper to make. You don't have to mine. You don't have to go to the earth. You can just make a factory, and sodium and chloride are fairly easy to come by, and you just put them together and now you've got salt. Good job. Yay us. So it's really cheap. We can make it. We can also do like the iodized salt where there's iodine in it, which became really popular in World War II when people were really iodine deficient. And we've basically more and more moved away from using real, just salt of the earth salt, guys. And we've used more and more man-made salt. So here's where canning comes in. So I will buy low sodium canned goods because most canned goods are not they're made with cheap table salt. They're made with cheap man-made salt. That's how the product gets so cheap and affordable. It's one of the ways, at least. And so I will buy the low sodium, and then I will add in Himalayan sea salt, which is the main one I use because it's super accessible. You can also use Celtic sea salt. You can use sea salt, though that one has the least amount of additional trace minerals, which can be helpful for absorption and balancing sodium. So Himalayan salt is fairly accessible. Also using salt that's from, this is a little bit more specific, but you can buy salt that is from basically dried up lakes. So Salt Lake City, they have some salt reserves, and they will mine that salt. That salt is very clean. It's not from the sea. It's not from the Himalayan mountains. It's its own salt. So you can like look for brands that sell salt from, I know that there's like a big salt patch in South America somewhere, and I recently learned of a brand. I didn't go and look it up, but there's just different brands that you can get that are just not man-made, right? But again, Himalayan pink salt is just so accessible. It's at Costco. It's so many places. It's a reasonable price. And I found it does the job in getting good sodium into your body. Okay, so that's the second reason so many of us are sodium deficient. Those two on their own, where we're basically lowering salt in unnecessary ways as a society because of bad research. And then 2, having chemical salts that we are exposing ourselves to, like a lot of. And what happens is we actually don't absorb chemical salt. Not into our cells, at least. We will absorb it into the bloodstream, which will raise blood pressure because it can't then get into the cell. And sodium is important for cells because of something called the sodium-potassium pump. And it helps pump things into the cell and pump things out of the cell. So when we get to fixing sodium in the body, I'm going to mention that potassium is super important because sodium and potassium work together. You cannot do one without the other. At least you won't really get amazing results. if you do sodium but not potassium, and vice versa, because of needing it to get into the cell. All right, number 3, because of this chemical salt that is raising our blood pressure because it's hanging out in the bloodstream and it's not even getting into our cells, and then bad research that's then reinforcing our fear of salt. I believe that this has caused an overemphasis on magnesium. So magnesium is another electrolyte, but we will say magnesium's good for calming you. Magnesium will help you sleep. Magnesium will help muscle cramping. Well, actually, sodium, potassium are needed to also stop muscle cramping. And it's been really interesting since I started working with clients, with other people since 2018. I've had several clients come in and say, I take magnesium every night and I still get Charlie horses, or I still get muscle cramping or muscle twitching. And the reason why is because they're taking magnesium, but not sodium, potassium, and they're massively deficient in those. Now, you can still take just magnesium, and if you notice an improvement in your cramping and muscle, then you probably have just enough sodium, potassium. It doesn't mean you're totally sufficient. It just means you're not deficient enough to make the magnesium basically completely useless. But that's the third thing. It's just an overemphasis on magnesium. So we hear a lot about magnesium, and then we are afraid of sodium, and then potassium just gets ignored. I'm not sure what's up with that, but it's like a black hole. No one talks about it. The fourth thing is going to be toxins and pathogens. So the number one thing that causes sodium deficiency, other than the general kind of environment we're in, because maybe you're like, Allison, I don't eat table salt. Allison, I know salt's good for you and I've been taking it. Another reason you can be sodium deficient, even if you're taking good old healthy salt in good quantities every day, is toxins and pathogens. And the reason for this is that toxins like heavy metals, mycotoxins that come from mold, and then pathogens elevate the adrenal gland response. And your adrenal gland controls the hormone aldosterone that controls sodium and potassium use in the body and in the blood. And if your cortisol has been really high, your aldosterone will also be high, and you will basically burn through your sodium, potassium, and become deficient. You're using it at an accelerated rate. So this had to do with that high blood pressure that I was talking about. If you have high blood pressure, majority of the time, at least all my clients I've worked with who have high blood pressure also have hidden pathogens and possibly heavy metals, not all of them with heavy metals, but always the pathogens that are elevating cortisol, elevating aldosterone, and making their sodium levels, even if it's not like super, super high in the blood, it's causing havoc, right? It's causing havoc on the cardiovascular system, on their arterial flow, all this stuff. And then they get the high blood pressure. You need to help calm down the adrenal glands. And unfortunately, the main way that we talk about calming down the adrenal glands in society is simply meditation, or like de-stressing, or do things for yourself, or sleep more, or take a shower, like do things that reduce psychological stress. But there's two other types of stress. One of them is physical, has to do with like sleep deprivation. We do kind of address this. Surgeries are physical stressors. Car accidents are physical stressors. Giving birth is a physical stressor. Running a marathon is a physical stressor. And then the third one, this is the one that really gets pretty much completely ignored. And it's the one where most of the problems with the adrenal glands are happening, because we are talking in society about the other two. The third one is biochemical stressors. Toxins like heavy metals, mold toxins. For some people that might also include parabens, phthalates, things like that. And then pathogens. So H. pylori, candida, C. diff, mold toxins, parasites. Whether or not, even if you've done some of these protocols, maybe say, I've already done a parasite protocol, but you might have a parasite, but were you also checked for H. pylori? Have you gotten rid of every pathogen? And for every client who has ongoing symptoms, when they come to me, the answer is no. They always had a pathogen that somebody didn't check for, somebody didn't address, and that's why they continue to have their symptoms. That's why their adrenal glands are getting depleted. That's why they have adrenal fatigue. That's why their sodium is depleted, because their adrenal glands already burned through all of it. All right, that's number 4. Toxin pathogens create sodium deficiency through adrenal gland upregulation. And then number 5 is just bad proliferating of education on the quote unquote right amount of salt. This honestly, I think, no, I'm guessing most people actually don't have a number of milligrams in their head that they're like, I know I need this many milligrams of salt. We just kind of think, okay, I'll go drink an electrolyte drink like Gatorade, and I'm sure that's enough. It's not enough. And that's where the education is missing. I'm not sure why we're not teaching the actual amount of sodium. It could be kind of like a fear still of like too much sodium is bad. So Gatorade has barely any sodium in it at all. I just looked up online one. It has 270 milligrams of sodium and 80 milligrams of potassium and then 34 grams of sugar. By the way, did you know you actually need magnesium, sodium, and potassium to process sugar in your body, especially magnesium. So sugar can deplete you in electrolytes. So you're like taking this drink that has electrolytes, and if you need the sugar because you're like a high performing athlete and like we don't all need to be drinking sugar while we're exercising, but sugar can have its place, especially if you're doing like long distance, long stamina events like marathons, ultra marathons, things like that. Yeah, you need sugar. But for a lot of us, if we're just like doing a soccer game with some friends or doing a 3-mile run, we don't need 34 grams of sugar replacing all of the glucose we just burned. We just don't. It's unnecessary. So keep that in your mind, 270 milligrams of sodium and 80 milligrams of potassium. And it's going to be laughable when I tell you how much you need for like maintaining sodium levels and how much you're going to need to actually build your sodium levels again. It's crazy. All right. So those are the 5 reasons why I think so many of us are sodium deficient. The next thing is, how do you test this? The main thing here, it's not blood work, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, our body is very, very, very picky about our blood homeostasis levels. It wants us to be in that middle level, and it will do anything to keep blood levels of sodium good, but that does not reflect on cellular levels. So that's number one. Number two is that most people don't have access to functional lab ranges to actually see a smaller, more precise range of what the blood work should be based on healthy individuals. Standard lab ranges are wider, bigger lab ranges that have to do with the average results for people that lab has analyzed. It doesn't mean they're healthy. It just means that's the average high, the average low, and you have to fall even higher or even lower than those averages. You have to be basically sicker than everybody else to look abnormal. That's the main reason why you don't want to trust blood work. Now, if you do want functional lab ranges, I have created and I've shared my own functional blood chemistry analysis spreadsheet. You can go to betterbellytherapies.com/blood or click the link in the show notes and go and get that spreadsheet. It is super affordable, and you can just plug in all of your lab markers and you can track all of your blood work from the past through the future. It automatically populates if something's high or low. It'll color code it so you can see it really easily. It will automatically bring up common causes and reasons why that might be high and low. So you can just look through everything and you're going to see so much more than your doctor has ever shown you. But even then, it still might be a normal range, even with a functional lab range, because of that body working so hard to create homeostasis. So a better lab that I have found to get an idea of the overall status of sodium in the body, and especially close to the cells, is the hair tissue mineral analysis. This is a sample of hair that analyzes the mineral inside the hair. It was developed by doctors who just over time started looking at, for healthy individuals, what do their hair mineral samples look like? What are the ranges that they're falling in? And when you look at an HTMA, if you have low sodium and potassium, that always means you're deficient. In like on a cellular level, you don't have enough to eke out and push out into your hair. Now, if you have high levels on the HTMA, it can still mean you're deficient, because it might mean that your aldosterone levels from your adrenal glands are really elevated and you're basically burning through your sodium. That's usually going to be because of a state of acute stress or illness. So stress could be, moving houses, starting a new job, financial stressors, but stress also includes hidden pathogens you don't know are there, food sensitivities you don't know are there, toxins you don't know are there. And that's what the Better Belly Blueprint helps you take through and quickly get rid of in 3 to 6 months. So most of the time I will get clients who are low. By the time that they find us, they've had maybe on average 10 years of not feeling well. in 10 years of not feeling well is going to be just not feeling your best. Maybe for some of them, it's feeling absolutely horrible. For some of our clients, it's just, I just feel like, it's almost like, is it just me getting older? I don't have energy when I get up. I don't think as clearly. I get that nighttime urination. It's probably because I'm female and I had 3 babies. No, it's because you're sodium deficient. And so majority of our clients are going to be straight up low. A couple of them are still in an acute phase where their body still has sodium that they're burning through at an elevated rate. There is one case where if it's high, that it's actual sodium excess, but there has to be other markers that are high, and I've never seen that in any of our clients. Imagine that. All right, so that's how you test. Don't rely on blood work, and do get an HTMA. That is a lab that we provide in our program, the Better Belly Blueprint. You can order it straight through us. You can also get all the other labs you'll need so that you can fully get rid of your salt in the appropriate way. So lastly, how do you actually replenish your sodium? Let's talk about this. So step number 1, I've already kind of introed, so hopefully it isn't surprising. Number 1, you want to get rid of your pathogens and toxins. If you don't do this, a couple things will happen. Number 1, if you have heavy metals, aluminum, mercury, arsenic, uranium, you don't know it. None of our clients do. Every client who gets a high mercury, high uranium, high arsenic, high aluminum levels on their HTMA when they see it are totally surprised. Every now and again we'll get somebody who's like, I knew I had mercury amalgams and I got rid of them, and I got rid of them because of the mercury exposure. I'm not surprised it's high. But most clients, none of us are thinking, I'm definitely the heavy metal person. If you have a heavy metal, the reason they're called heavy metals is because they actually are heavier on the table of elements, and they push out and replace our healthy minerals. And it has to do, not like, I don't really want to get into it, but it has to do with chemistry. They're heavier. And so heavy metals are a huge reason why, even if you're taking salt, you still might not absorb it. The other thing is if you have those pathogens, the pathogens aren't necessarily bothering the salt directly, but they're going to bother the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands will create that aldosterone, and you'll just burn through the salt and you won't really get it into the cells. So you do want to get rid of pathogens and toxins. That's a whole process that I teach you how to do in 3 to 6 months in the Better Belly Blueprint. You can go to betterbellytherapies.com/training to learn exactly how this works. And then number 2, you want to avoid chemical salt. You can start avoiding chemical salt even before you get rid of pathogens and toxins, but basically throw away your table salt. Really avoid table salt at restaurants. If you do travel a lot and you like salt in your food like me, and you travel regularly, bring your own salt. Like, keep a salt in your purse. Keep a salt in your car that has Himalayan pink salt in it. There's lots of different ways you can do that in smaller or larger containers. But yeah, I usually try to avoid table salt at restaurants. Sometimes it's already unavoidable, like getting corn tortilla chips at a Mexican restaurant. They're most likely already having thrown table salt. I just suck it up. It's like, I'm not eating these all the time. If you buy potato chips, buy brands that say Himalayan salt on them. That's the benefit of those brands. They're not using table salt. Other ways that you might be able to get table salt might be things like soy sauce, just like the cheap American kind, unless it's traditionally made with fermented soybeans. Usually this soy sauce is going to have wheat in it, and it's going to have a lot of table salt. And then salad dressings. If you just get higher end brands, they're typically using better types of salt, but they don't always label. Sometimes they'll just say salt, right? You don't know which kind it is. Again, salad dressings is probably not the biggest place you're going to get exposed to table salt. It's definitely going to be things like potato chips, canned foods. You're going to have a ton of table salt in it. So again, get low sodium canned foods and then just add your own Himalayan salt. Going to restaurants where they're going to use a ton of table salt before they cook the food, and then it's going to be on the table. Again, higher end, I always get very, very excited when I go and walk into a restaurant and they've got a little pink Himalayan salt on the table. And I'm just I just feel better about this restaurant already. So other good signs, you can find restaurants that are just slightly higher end. It's not going to be McDonald's, but you probably already aren't eating there if you are listening to this. So that's going to be number 2, avoid the chemical salt. They will make it harder to get in the real good salt. And number 3, take sodium, potassium daily. But the question is, how much? Dun, 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 dun. All right, so we talked about how much Gatorade had. It had 270 milligrams and 80 milligrams of sodium and 80 milligrams of potassium. You want a maintenance level of potassium and sodium is 1,000 milligrams each. So 1,000 milligrams, that Gatorade that I'm looking at, I don't know if all Gatorade has the same amount of sodium, but this one I pulled up, which looks like a very normal version that they have, it only has a quarter of what you need. You need 4 Gatorades to get the maintenance level of sodium, like just what you need to maintain your day-to-day living. And your potassium won't get anywhere near that. So you need 1,000 milligrams of salt, 1,000 milligrams of potassium. Now, if you're trying to replenish depleted reserves, I would double that minimum. So 1,000 in the morning, 1,000 in the evening. It doesn't have to be taken all at once. If you do take it all at once and you are super deprived of sodium, you can get what we call the dry sponge effect, where you actually will puff up. So that puffy hands, puffy feet, puffy face that you can get after eating, like, say, Chinese food or really, really high salt foods, it's because of the table salt in it. And then on top of that, even if it's real salt, say you're like, but now it's real salt and I'm still puffing up. It's because you are so sodium deficient that when you take a lot in, it's like a dry sponge. If you ever take a really dry sponge and put it under your faucet in your kitchen, initially the water simply runs off the sponge. It takes it a moment before the water can actually really start to absorb into the sponge, and the sponge becomes soft again and supple and able to bring in the water and push it out. It's the same thing. When your sodium potassium pumps are so depleted of sodium, initially you won't be able to take in very much sodium, so you have to do smaller doses. Most of my clients, 250 milligrams, if they're beginning, is good enough. Some of them have chosen to do even smaller milligrams just to be safer because they hate the puffing up experience. But once you expose yourself to salt regularly enough, then that sodium potassium pump will heal and you'll be able to take high doses of sodium without puffing up. And this has to do also with high blood pressure. That's why with high blood pressure, folks, I do not typically recommend starting 1,000 milligrams of potassium and sodium, because the reason they have high blood pressure is usually partly connected with having cells that can't absorb the sodium. So we need to just be more careful if you have a medical condition that can be related to sodium deficiency and poor sodium absorption. All right, so how much is 1,000 milligrams? If you're just like, can I just teaspoon this or tablespoon, what is this, onto your food or into your water? Here's how you do that. 1/2 of a teaspoon is 1,000 milligrams of salt, and 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar, which is primarily potassium, is going to be 1,000 milligrams. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar. That is a recipe you can actually use and just add in a little bit of water or a little bit of lemon juice can actually sometimes be a nice, it's already going to be very puckery, but the lemon juice I find actually helps balance it in some ways. And I call it a potassium shot, and you just drink it really fast in the morning. It can actually help create a bowel movement. If you want to learn more on the whole bowel movement thing, go to betterbellytherapies.com/constipation or download my free constipation relief guide with 3 natural remedies for constipation. And it will walk you through exactly how you can use this potassium shot to actually create a bowel movement, which is, if you are here to poop, then go have at that. But that's what it would practically look like to have sodium on enough, just maintenance, daily amount of sodium. And the other thing you can do is you can do things like, I really like a product called IQ Mix on Amazon. I'll put a link in the show notes. And it has 500 milligrams of sodium in it and 500 milligrams of potassium. And it has a fairly nice flavor. My daughter likes the brand. And you drink one of those packets in the morning, one at night, have maintenance level sodium. And if you're really sodium deficient, starting at maintenance level can be nice for 2 weeks, a month, and then you can go to therapeutic dosage. Again, I usually don't recommend going to therapeutic dosage until you have gotten rid of all your pathogens and heavy metals, or at least verified you don't have any with testing. And that type of testing you can't get done in hospitals. In conventional medicine, they just don't have access to it. They don't do anything like this. But that is the last thing you could do is something called Element. Some of you guys are familiar with that. I just get asked a lot of questions about it. Capital L, capital M, capital N, capital T. I don't like it as much as IQ Mix because it has 1,000 milligrams of salt, but I believe off the top of my head, 400 milligrams of potassium, maybe 500. So you have to add cream of tartar to get it to be a 1-to-1 ratio of 1,000 milligrams of salt, 1,000 milligrams of potassium. And I find IQ Mix is a little bit more affordable. It's basically, I don't know if it's intending this, but it's basically off-brand Element. And I like that it's already in a 1-to-1 ratio of sodium potassium. So that is it. You need to take 1,000 milligrams of potassium and sodium every day for maintenance and 2,000 of each every day for developing. The last thing you do, step 4, is you want to retest your sodium potassium levels with your HTMA every 3 to 4 months until you see your levels return to normal. It can be very normal that they stay low for many months. It takes a very, very long time to get potassium levels to a good point. It takes a very long time to get sodium to not be either low or high. Because the second thing that'll happen is sometimes if your adrenal glands are still pumping out too much juice, you'll shoot up your sodium. Some of my clients freak out because they think, oh no, I took too much sodium. No, you did not. You just need to get rid of whatever's irritating your adrenal glands. And a lot of times we already know that in the Better Belly Blueprint. We say, okay, we know you're dealing with mold mycotoxins. We know you're dealing with getting rid of more mercury in your body. We're already working on those plans. We can either pull back a little on the sodium, but we don't want to stop it because you still want to be giving your body that sodium that it is trying to use. And eventually that sodium level falls again and you end up in that nice middle range. No symptoms, great sleep, no fatigue, pooping every day, no bloating, and not having to take gobs of sodium, potassium, being a lot more balanced. So that is it, guys. That is all the information, all of the information on salt. It is not bad for you. It is good for you. It is not causing your high blood pressure. It is likely, at least high amounts of salt is not causing it. It's actually likely low amounts of salt, but you do want to be careful if it's high blood pressure. You just do it in a very methodical way with ideally helping guidance, just so nothing gets crazy along the way. You've learned about positive and negative ions that sodium that's man-made or nature-made will have. You've learned about how to test. You've learned how to replenish. You learned the actual therapeutic levels of salt and why just common electrolyte brands of even not just Gatorade, but Liquid IV also has very insufficient levels of getting just a daily maintenance dose of sodium. So that is it. I hope this was super fascinating and enlightening. I hope it gives you one more idea of where it's been missing in healing your symptoms. And if you want support in working on your health, if you want the framework that'll take you step by step on exactly what to do in a way that's not overwhelming so you know you're right on track every step of the way, I would love to support you inside the Better Belly Blueprint. You can go to betterbellytherapies.com/training, watch the short little training video that's shorter than your favorite TV show on how it all works and it'll go take you through the costs and lots of frequently asked questions, and then come and join. Come and finally get that healing so that you don't have to be worrying about your health in 3 to 6 months. You can be focusing on other things and know that your health is in a really good spot. That's not going to take gobs of maintenance and annoying diet restrictions and supplements. You can finally cut the budget of your supplements or cut the number of foods you're having to restrict because your gut and your whole body will finally be healed. I hope this helped, and I'll see you guys next week. Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening. You can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of. And you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.